All right, so this is the big moment. The high-stakes Trump-Putin meeting is currently underway in Anchorage in Alaska. A short while ago, the two leaders arrived at the U.S.'s Elmendorf-Richardson military base. And the first American President Donald Trump's Air Force One aircraft arrived. Shortly afterwards, Putin's presidential plane landed at this American military base. The two leaders walked towards each other, shook hands, and then exchanged smiles. In a gesture that spoke of the significance of this meeting, the American B-2 bombers and fighter jets thundered over the skies above them as Trump and Putin walked on the red carpet. The two leaders then sat in the same car and drove out of the tarmac. Both Putin and Trump were seen sharing a laugh as they left for the closed-door meeting. The meeting, however, is no longer a one-on-one meet. It is instead a three-on-three meeting, with Trump being joined by the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his special envoy Steve Witkoff also joining him, while Vladimir Putin will be joined by his aide Ushakov and the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And ahead of the meeting, Trump had said that he will let Ukraine decide on any possible territorial swaps. All of this comes as the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who, remember, is not a part of the talks that are currently underway in Alaska, and his European allies fear that Trump might sell out Ukraine by essentially freezing the conflict and recognizing Russian control over 1/5 of the Ukrainian territory.
Are the territorial swaps on the table? Will you be discussing that?
They'll be discussed, but I've got to let Ukraine make that decision. And I think they'll make a proper decision. But I'm not here to negotiate for Ukraine. I'm here to get them at a table. And I think you have two sides. Look, Vladimir Putin wanted to take all of Ukraine. If I wasn't president, he would right now be taking all of Ukraine. But he's not going to do it.
And earlier, Trump had also issued a very stern warning to Russia if no peace deal is signed during the crucial Alaska summit.
You had said earlier this week that Putin would face severe consequences if you get the sense from him that he's not interested. What do you mean by that?
Economically severe. Yes, it will be very severe. I'm not doing this for my health, okay? I don't need it. I'd like to focus on our country, but I'm doing this to save a lot of lives. Yeah, very severe.
For Vladimir Putin, the summit is already a big win, as he can use it to say that years of Western attempts to isolate Russia have completely unraveled, and that Moscow has now retaken its rightful place at the top table of international diplomacy. Earlier, Kremlin had said that the meeting could, of course, last for a minimum of 6 to 7 hours. And ahead of the crucial meeting, both Russia and Ukraine, remember, traded fire at each other. The Ukrainian Navy claimed that an Su-30 SM fighter jet crashed near the Zimny Island. The $50 million aircraft, twin-engine, two-seater multi-role fighter jet, reportedly crashed for unknown reasons. Zelensky said that there are no signals from Russia to stop the war, and he also called for a three-way meeting.
The war continues. It continues precisely because there is no order, nor any signals from Moscow that it is preparing to end this war. They are also killing on the day of the negotiations.
The Ukrainian forces also launched a strike deep inside of Russia. They targeted an oil refinery in the Samara Oblast, which processes nearly 9 million tons of crude a year and fuels the Russian military. Now, Ukraine has also said that it has blown up Russia's Port Olia ship. All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Mr. Mikael Walterson, who's a military and a political analyst and a former officer of the Swedish Army. He's joining us live from Stockholm. Mr. Walterson, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, this is a critical moment to decide the future of Ukraine, but Ukraine itself is not present at the negotiating table. In your assessment, what is the proposal that you think that the two leaders, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, could agree to?
Well, it's hard, but Trump wants this to be a success. So he will say that it is a success if it's not too bad. And there might be nothing that results from the meeting, but it will still be presented as a success. I believe that Russia might attempt to try to be that they don't be so hard in their position. So they might say that they can have a ceasefire if they get the Donetsk area, and not Zaporizhia and Kherson. And Trump, I think that's a good compromise, especially when we heard what he said, that if he wasn't president, then Russia would have taken the entire Ukraine. So that would be a good compromise. But of course, for Ukraine, they can't give away 6,000 square kilometers with strong fortifications without a fight. Right. So they will say no. So, but Putin and Trump might agree on something, and then we have the next step. That's Ukraine.
All right. Now, the Ukrainians will turn around and say that Russia's been trying to get hold of the Donetsk region for the last 10 years, since 2014 onwards, and they haven't succeeded in the last 10 years. So why should they trade away Donetsk and Zaporizhia in exchange for territory in places such as Sumy or Kharkiv?
Well, the main reason would be that if the U.S. supports that kind of deal, they would be on the bad foot with Trump, and Trump might stop all support to Ukraine and restore relations with Russia. And that would be very, very hard for Ukraine. U.S. haven't given a dollar since Trump became president to Ukraine. But Europe, or rather Northern Europe and the United Kingdom, have stepped in. So that they have money, but they don't have weapons. So they must buy weapons from the US and send them to Ukraine. And if Trump becomes disgusted with Ukraine, he might stop that.
Interesting. There are certain aspects of how a European security architecture, of course, is likely to get impacted because of this meeting between Trump and Putin. But before that, I want to also ask you this. Considering as to how Donald Trump has tried to reach out to Vladimir Putin, at this moment, Vladimir Putin believes that he's winning on the battlefield. Why do you think Putin will agree to this proposal by Donald Trump?
Well, one main factor is the threat of even harder U.S. sanctions. That would hurt Russia, or it would hurt Russia's trading partners, especially China, India, Turkey, and it wouldn't be good for the Russian economy, and it would heighten tension in the world, and it might strengthen Ukraine, because U.S. might be more willing to send weapons to Ukraine. But the main purpose for Russia is just to avoid these sanctions. If nothing else happens during the meeting, they would be rather satisfied, because then they can continue the offensive, and the speed of offensive have been increasing the last month. Right. And we see the cracks in the Ukrainian defenses.
Interesting. But the Western nations have been trying to break the back of the Russian economy, which has been financing this war right from the beginning of this war. Just because the Americans are placing these punitive sanctions on some of the other trading partners of Russia, do you think that can convince Vladimir Putin to pull back his military war machine, which clearly has an upper hand on the battlefield?
No, he won't back down, but there might be a ceasefire along the front line, but I don't believe that either. But if he was, if he proposed to get Donetsk and Ukraine accept that, then he can't back down. So then we probably will get a ceasefire, and the Russians will move forwards a little bit, but it won't be a drastic change on the Ukrainian map. The area that we are talking about is 6,000 square kilometers, 1% of the area of Ukraine.
But Mr. Walterson, if you look at what Donetsk actually represents, it is this area which has got 80% of Ukraine's heavy industries. It is this area which also reportedly has some very large reserves of rare earth minerals. With that being said, why do you think the Ukrainians would want to just trade it off to some territory in Sumy and Kharkiv?
No, I don't believe that they will, but Russia will give that maybe as a proposal, and then Ukraine will say no, and then Russia can say it's Ukraine that doesn't want peace.
All right, so you think this is a proposal that just would not be acceptable to Ukraine, and therefore the Russians would say that the war can continue. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, and Russia has said that to the United States earlier. They want the entirety of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk, but it could be seen as a compromise if they just demand Donetsk just now.
Right. Now, Mr. Walterson, you're joining us from Sweden. Sweden, in fact, became a member of the NATO military alliance in March 2024, just last year. And a lot of people are looking at this conflict to say that Ukraine is an example which clearly indicates, if not the failure, then at least the limitations of NATO's military power led by the United States of America, because Ukraine was essentially backed by the United States' weapons that were supplied to it, and they seem to have come second best in this contest with the Russians. How do you respond to that?
Well, in Sweden, many says that the example of Ukraine was that showed that you had to be a member of NATO. If you wasn't a member of NATO, you wouldn't get any real support. But of course, the Article 5 in the NATO statute just say that every country should help, not how they are going to help. So theoretically, you can give a shovel and say, I have helped, and then you have helped. So that's the problem the Europeans have with Trump now. They don't know which help they will get from US in case of a larger conflict. But Sweden is very
Trump has made it clear. Trump has made it clear. He wants the Europeans to step up. He wants the Europeans to pay for their security. He wants the Europeans to fight their own wars to keep their borders safe. He said it over and over again. And that changes the very security architecture of Europe. And now that Sweden has become one of the most recent members of the NATO military alliance, do you think that entire eastern frontier of NATO will now be having a rethink on what happens next after this debacle in Ukraine?
Well, much depends on how the war in Ukraine ends. Because if it ends with a huge victory for Russia, then and at the same time the US abandons Europe, Europe would be forced to strengthen its defense very much. But there's a big split in politics in Europe. It's the countries in Northern Europe, Poland, Germany, and the United Kingdom that are strong supporters of Ukraine. Even if Macron and France say that they are strong supporters, they don't give much in military and economic aid. And the same goes for the southern part of Europe. And there are many strong political groups in Europe who want to have good relations with Russia, and especially in the southern and central parts of Europe. And it might be that Europe will be divided in this question very much in the future.
You know, I think the world order that emerged after the end of the Cold War is being seriously altered and being challenged as we speak. Ms. Walterson, there is a lot more that we want to discuss with you. Do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, I'm told that my colleague Siddharth MP is joining us this moment from Moscow. Siddharth, if you can hear me, this is a critical moment. Give us a sense of what the mood is like in Russia, and what are the people in Moscow talking about, and what are their expectations from this big ticket meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump?
Well, certainly as far as some of the polls go, there is a huge deal of support for President Putin. About 80% of the people who took part in that poll support President Putin. So that certainly is being seen as a positive step or a thumbs up for Vladimir Putin and his efforts undertaken over the last 3.5 years since this particular special military operation, in Russia's words, started. So that is one thing as far as Russia is concerned. But on the other front, this is also two big powers coming to the discussion table and then sitting together, trying to thrash out issues that were otherwise affecting the whole world. So now the two big people who matter are on the table. They're trying to discuss, they're trying to, make sense of what's happening, each one sharing their perspectives and then trying to reach a common ground. So that itself is seen as a positive step, certainly, Saleh.
Right, and also, Siddharth, considering as to how difficult and abrasive this war has been for the Russian nation itself, even though it is winning on the battlefield, what appetite is still left amongst the common people in Russia to take the financial pain that this war has in fact brought on the Russian nation?
See, speaking from my experience of having spent close to a week here, things appear to be completely normal, because if you look at the kind of vehicles plying, if you look at the number of people taking flights, if you look at the number of people in restaurants, if you look at normal life as such, it appears unaffected, it appears to be normal. But of course, we cannot get into details without really seeing what the impact is on people who've been living here for 3 years, whether things have changed over the last 3 years. That's something we'll have to really understand from the people here who've been living long term. What was it like pre-2022? What is it like today? So that's something only those who've been living here entirely can tell. But from what we spent over here, we can say things look absolutely normal as far as the vehicles on the streets go. As commoners, how do we judge how things are going around you? So on that basis, we can tell you that things look absolutely normal.